The leaves crunched softly beneath Charles's worn boots as he strolled the familiar paths of Maplewood Park, Duke, his German shepherd, trotting loyally beside him. The late afternoon sun filtered through the golden canopy, casting long streaks of light on the ground and painting the world in autumn warmth. This walk had become a ritual ever since Charles retired and moved into the small apartment across from the park. At 76, his joints ached and his back protested. But walking Duke was the one thing that made him feel young again, alive even. Duke, ever watchful and strong, was more than just a dog. He was family, a gift from a neighbor who knew Charles had no one left. The two had been inseparable for nearly 6 years. Charles still wore his old army jacket, its stitching faded, the patch on the shoulder barely readable. He didn't wear it for recognition. He wore it because it still fit, and because it reminded him who he once was. A man who stood tall, who had purpose, who protected others. But no amount of memory could prepare him for what happened next. As he rounded the bend near the park's far side, where the trees grew denser and the lights fewer, he noticed movement just ahead. 3 young men emerged from the shadows, dressed in dark hoodies, their hands shoved deep in their pockets. Charles's instincts kicked in immediately. He slowed, tightened Duke's leash, and kept his eyes forward. But the men didn't move aside. Instead, they spread slightly, blocking the narrow path. One of them, tall with sharp cheekbones and cold eyes, smirked. "Nice dog," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Too nice for a wrinkled fossil like you." Charles stopped, Duke immediately stepping closer to his leg. The second man, heavier built with tattoos creeping up his neck, chimed in. "Better hold that mutt tight before we toss it in the damn river. And while you're at it, hand over your wallet, old man." Charles blinked, trying to keep his breathing steady. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Then don't cause any," the third one snapped, stepping forward aggressively. "We said, give us your money." Duke let out a low growl, his body stiffening. Charles placed a hand gently on the dog's back. He glanced around. No one nearby, no joggers, no strollers, just trees and fading light. His phone. He needed to call someone. With one hand, he reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled it out, trying not to provoke them. "I'll give you what I have," he muttered, "but let me call someone first. Just let me do this the right way." He pressed the screen, trying to unlock it with his shaky fingers. The leader saw it immediately. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked, lunging forward. Before Charles could react, a rough hand smacked the phone from his grip. It flew into the bushes beside the path and landed with a soft thud in the grass. "You think we're stupid?" the tattooed one shouted. "Trying to call the cops?" Charles stumbled back, gritting his teeth, heart pounding in his ears. Duke barked sharply, stepping forward in front of him. "You don't know who you're messing with, old man," the third said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's teach him a lesson." They moved in closer, and Charles backed away instinctively. His knees buckled slightly. For a moment, he wasn't in the park anymore. He was back in a foreign land, ducking behind sandbags, the sound of gunfire in the air. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was his neighborhood, and he was just an old man with a dog. I have nothing," he stammered. Just leave us alone." One of the men reached out, grabbing at his sleeve, and that's when it happened. Duke, silent until that second, surged forward with a sudden explosive bark. He launched himself at the man's arm, clamping down with force. The thug screamed, twisting as the dog knocked him backward. The other two froze, eyes wide in shock. "Get it off! Get it off me!" the bitten one shouted. Duke released just long enough to bark again, ferocious and protective, standing between Charles and the attackers. The second man pulled a switchblade from his coat, but hesitated. He hadn't expected resistance. "This ain't worth it, man," he shouted. "Let's go!" They turned and ran, vanishing into the trees with curses and threats trailing behind them. Charles stood frozen, his breath shaky, staring at the spot where they had disappeared. Duke came back to his side, tail stiff, breathing heavy but unharmed. Charles dropped to one knee and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "You saved me," he whispered. "You damn hero." He sat there for several minutes, trying to calm his shaking hands, stroking Duke's fur. working. He didn't call the police. He just wanted to go home. That night, Charles didn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway made him flinch. He replayed the scene in his mind 100 times. It was the first time in years he had felt so helpless. But Duke had been fearless. And somehow, that gave him hope. Tomorrow he would walk again. He would not be pushed into fear, but he would be more careful. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find someone to talk to. Charles couldn't shake the tension from his bones even the next morning. The events from the night before looped in his mind like an old film, broken, fragmented, but painfully clear. The young punks had meant to hurt him. That much was obvious. They weren't just there to scare. Something darker lived behind their eyes. If it hadn't been for Duke, God knows what would have happened. The bite had landed fast and hard, catching one of them completely off guard, and the rest had scattered like roaches. But now, Charles felt something different, an unease that didn't go away with sunlight. He kept glancing over his shoulder as he moved through his kitchen, pouring himself a weak cup of coffee. His hands still shook slightly. Duke sat faithfully near the door, as always, as if nothing had changed. But even he seemed more alert than usual. Around noon, Charles walked past the cracked screen door and stood on the porch, looking toward the direction of the park. It was the same as always, quiet, calm, almost too calm. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Still, he found himself reaching for the old walking stick by the coat rack. Not because he needed help walking, not today, but because holding something in his hand felt a little safer. He told himself he wouldn't go back today. Let it settle. But as the evening rolled around and the sky began to bloom with pink and amber streaks, he found his feet taking him down the sidewalk anyway. Duke, sensing their usual routine, trotted eagerly beside him, leash taut in Charles's hand. Maybe this time, they'd walk on the outer loop, closer to the street, just a short one. No deep trails, no risks. Still, the old man couldn't ignore how the air changed once they reached the edges of the trees. It wasn't just temperature. It was something in the wind, in the rustling of the leaves. They didn't take the same path. Charles steered Duke along a different section of the park, one lined with more open space and fewer shadows. The lampposts here still flickered weakly. But it was better than darkness. It was nearly 8 p.m., and a thin layer of mist was starting to creep across the ground, swirling gently over the grass like breath in the cold. Charles glanced at his watch and muttered, "We don't stay long, okay, boy?" Duke tilted his head slightly, but said nothing, of course. They walked in silence, only the soft sound of paws and boots against dirt marking their presence. Then Charles heard it, a rustle in the bushes, quick, subtle, too sharp to be wind. Duke stopped immediately, ears raised, body tense. A low growl started to form in his throat. Charles froze. He squinted toward the source of the noise. Probably a squirrel, he muttered, though even he didn't believe it. The growling intensified. Suddenly, the bush exploded in motion. Two figures burst out from the thicket, dark hoodies, masks, knives gleaming under the faint light. "Well, well," one of them snarled. "Look who came back to our park." Charles staggered back, gripping Duke's leash tightly. His chest tightened. It was them. Again. And they weren't here for money this time. They had waited, watched, planned. "I told you not to mess with us, you crusty old freak," the other one yelled. "Now it's time to teach you for real." Duke barked furiously, trying to lunge, but Charles held him back. His heart was pounding like a war drum. The leader lifted his blade and shouted, "Move, old man, or we move you." The words didn't even make sense. Charles felt his knees buckle slightly. He tried to step back, but his legs were heavy, not like they used to be. His body couldn't move the way it once did. His strength was in memories now, and fear began to rise like a tide. "I'm warning you," he said, voice cracking. But it didn't matter. The men advanced, knives raised, their mouths curled in malice. Charles looked around. Empty paths, no one nearby, no lights ahead. He realized then that he wouldn't be able to outrun them. There was nowhere to run to. His hands trembled. He whispered, almost like a prayer, "Come on, Duke. Protect us." And then he closed his eyes. He expected pain, But what he heard instead was chaos, a scream, a shout, the clatter of feet. Then Duke lunged. No more hesitation. The dog tore into the first attacker, clamping onto his arm, sending the knife skidding across the pavement. The thug howled in agony, swinging wildly to get free, but Duke wouldn't let go. The second man tried to intervene, rushing in from the side, but Duke turned with lightning speed and snapped at his leg, drawing blood. Both men staggered back, yelling, cursing, trying to regroup. Charles opened his eyes and saw them, stumbling, terrified. "What the hell kind of dog is that?" one of them shouted. "That thing's a demon!" But before they could run again, a group of people appeared from around the bend. 6, maybe 7, all broad-shouldered, moving fast. One of them, a young man with a gym bag slung over his shoulder, saw what was happening and yelled, "Hey, drop the knives!" The attackers turned. Too slow. 2 of the newcomers tackled them to the ground. Knives clattered again, this time landing far from their reach. The others helped restrain them, holding their arms down, pinning their legs. Duke growled, standing guard near Charles. One of the newcomers looked up at him and said, "Sir, are you okay?" Charles nodded slowly, breath catching in his throat. "Who are you?" "Boxing team," the man replied. "We trained just over there. We heard the noise." Charles could hardly believe it. He watched as the 2 attackers squirmed on the ground, mouths full of curses, blood on their sleeves where Duke had bitten. Charles walked over slowly. His body trembled with adrenaline and age, but his voice was steady now. He looked at the 2 pinned men, eyes full of something they hadn't seen before. Disappointment, not fear. "You came back," he said coldly. "You really thought it would end different this time?" The man with the bite on his arm spat to the side and grunted, "You're just a relic. You'll be gone soon anyway." Charles leaned in slightly. "And yet here I stand. Not because I'm strong, but because good people still exist, and a dog with more honor than you ever had." One of the boxers pulled out his phone and called the police. Sirens were heard a few minutes later. When the flashing red and blue lights arrived, the attackers were handed over easily. Officers took statements, asked questions, shook their heads when they heard what had happened. Duke sat quietly beside Charles the whole time, tail wagging once in a while, watching the officers with calm eyes. When the brawlers stood to leave, Charles stopped them. "Thank you," he said. "All of you. You didn't have to stop." "But you did." One of the boxers grinned. "Can't let punks like that run wild. Besides, your dog's a legend now." Charles chuckled softly. He's always been one. As the officers loaded the attackers into the car, one of them approached Charles. "Sir," he said, "you and that dog of yours saved more than yourselves tonight. That could have gone a lot worse." Charles nodded. He looked down at Duke, ruffled the fur behind his ears, and whispered, "You did good, boy." Again. Then slowly, Charles turned and began the long walk home. The night was darker now, but he didn't feel afraid. Not anymore. Charles had closed his eyes fully, expecting to be stabbed, his heart pounding in his chest, hands clenched around Duke's leash as if holding on for dear life. But what came next was not pain. It was panic, but not his. He heard one of the attackers scream, followed by a sharp curse, and then another cry as Duke lunged and sank his teeth into one of their arms. The thug shouted in agony, trying to shake the dog off, but Duke didn't let go until another one tried to hit him with the hilt of a knife. At which point Duke turned with lightning speed and bit that one in the leg. The third tried to step in, but hesitated just long enough for Duke to rear back and bare his teeth with such force that the man stumbled. The 3 of them, bleeding and shouting, began to retreat, their bravado gone and replaced by pure fear. But before they could make a full escape, a group of young men appeared from the side path, just returning from the nearby gym. A group of amateur boxers, laughing moments before, now instantly alert and serious as they saw what was happening. "Hey!" one of them shouted, pointing. "Drop the weapons!" Another boxer sprinted forward and tackled one of the thugs to the ground. The others quickly followed, grabbing the second and third and holding them firmly down in the grass as they squirmed and swore. Charles, breathing heavily, opened his eyes and saw the scene before him. Duke still in a defensive stance, tail stiff, the 3 attackers pinned by strangers who didn't even hesitate to help. Charles, moved by instinct and rising courage, stepped forward, walking slowly toward the downed criminals. He looked them over, the blood on their sleeves, the bruises already forming on their faces, and despite everything, his voice was calm when he asked, "Why? Why are you doing this? What do you get out of attacking someone like me?" The men didn't respond, just glared up at him with seething resentment. Charles shook his head. You're young. You could be anything. And yet here you are, trying to hurt a man and a dog who've never done you any harm. What do you think this gets you in the end? What kind of life are you choosing?" One of the boxers, still holding down a squirming attacker, looked up at Charles and said, "People like this only stop when someone stronger stands in front of them." Charles gave a faint nod. "Well, tonight you were that someone, and so was Duke." A few minutes later, police sirens cut through the night air, flashing red and blue against the trees as a patrol car pulled up near the path. Two officers emerged quickly, one with a flashlight and the other already on the radio. They took in the scene swiftly, the three pinned suspects, the battered veteran, the blood, the knife still lying nearby, and moved fast to secure the area. "What happened here?" one officer asked. One of the boxers stood, raising his hands peacefully. "These guys attacked him. The dog fought them off. We stepped in, held them down until you got here." Charles added, "It's the second night they've come after me. I guess they didn't learn the first time." The officer nodded, crouched beside one of the attackers, and read him his rights while cuffing him. The others were processed in the same way, searched, questioned, then hauled to their feet and taken to the back of the squad car. Charles watched in silence, one hand still resting on Duke's back. When it was over, one of the officers approached him directly. "Sir, are you all right?" Charles nodded slowly, a little shaken but safe. "Thanks to my dog and these young men." The officer gave a respectful smile. "You're lucky to have a dog like that." Charles looked down at Duke. "I know." Then he turned to the group of boxers, most of whom were catching their breath now, one checking a scraped knuckle. "Thank you," he said clearly. "You didn't have to help. But you did. You could have walked past like so many others might have." One of them shrugged. "You looked like you needed backup. We all do sometimes." Charles extended his hand, and the boxer shook it firmly. The officer returned with a notepad. "We'll be in touch for your full statement. Do you want to ride home?" Charles shook his head. "No, thank you. I've still got 2 legs. They're slow, but they'll carry me." He glanced at Duke. "And 4 more that are always ready." The officer smiled and nodded. "All right, sir. You and your dog take care. And if you ever feel unsafe, call us. Anytime." As the police pulled away with the suspects and the boxers headed off down the path, Charles stood in the dim park lights, the breeze cool against his face. He looked out over the trees, the grass, the benches, and realized something had shifted. The fear that had haunted him yesterday had lost its grip. He hadn't fought alone, and that meant something. He gave Duke one last pat on the head. "Come on, partner," he whispered. "Let's go home."